Good afternoon, friends. This is Valerie Van De Zilver, and you are listening to Always Ageless, where we believe that life does not come with an expiration date. If you're driving down the freeway right now, maybe headed home from work or on your way to see your family, or you're listening to us from your home or office, I want you to lean in for this one, especially if you've ever worried about an aging parent or older adult in your family, a loved one who needed help getting from here to there. Today's show is about something most people don't even know exists. I didn't know. And honestly, it can be life changing, especially in today's world in navigation. Imagine this: your mom lives across the country. She's had a health scare, or she's not being as strong as she used to be. And she really can't travel safely alone. But you're working, you've got kids, and you've thought of trying to get her on a plane, manage your medications, manage the security line at the airport, handle all the what ifs at 35,000 feet, and that keeps you up at night. Sound familiar? My guest today is someone who steps into those exact moments. He will be your hero. His name is Dr. Bob Bacheler, and he's the managing director of a company called Flying Angels. Sounds good already, doesn't it? They don't fly private jets. They use regular commercial airlines, but with a critical care flight nurse by your loved one's side, bedside to bedside, door to door. It's like having a guardian angel in scrubs whose job it is to get your person from point A to point B. Bob has more letters after his name than most of us have on our license plates. He's a doctor of nursing practice, a certified flight nurse, a critical care nurse, and a certified dementia practitioner, just for a few. Translation: he's been there, seen a lot, done it, and he knows how to keep people safe and calm in the air. We're going to talk about Flying Angels, what it actually does, real life stories from the sky, and what families should consider when using a service like this, and along with some travel tips for anyone helping an older adult or medically fragile loved one navigate airports and airlines. And we all could use those tips. So don't go anywhere. If you love someone who may need help traveling now or in the future, this conversation might be exactly what you need. So stay with us. We are right here with Dr. Bob Bacheler from Flying Angels. Welcome, Bob Bacheler. I have been wanting you on our show for a very long time. The first time I met you at a CSA conference, I thought, oh, he would be a great guest on my show. I thought, oh, I hope he would do it. And I've waited over a year to ask you. So thank you very much for joining us.
No, Valerie, thank you very much. It's actually my pleasure, and I'm a fan of the podcast. So to me, it's a great pleasure to be here and talk to your guests and have a conversation with you. So thank you very much.
Yes, thank you very much. Before we get into your impressive alphabet of credentials, how do you usually introduce yourself to families who are meeting you for the first time, either on the phone or in person?
Well, usually I'm just introducing myself as Bob. That seems to be the way to go. I try not to stand on formalities.
Was there a moment or a particular patient that made you say, this service is needed, it has to exist, and pushed you into starting Flying Angels?
Absolutely. So brief history, if I may. So
Yes,
I have
please.
been a nurse for just over 30 years now, and about eight. And I spent most of my time in the beginning doing what the term is, dude nurses do. I started my career in the trauma ICU and the burn units and all those adrenaline packed places in the hospital that you really don't want to ever see, but when you need are there. So that's where I spent the first 10 years of my career. And a friend of mine asked me if I would help transport his grandfather from Florida up to Toronto. And his grandfather had some dementia and was an ornery old cuss. And didn't get along with anybody, so they had no idea how they were going to do it. And I said, "Well, I'm a nurse. I want to be a flight nurse. All dude nurses want to be a flight nurse." And I said, "Sure, I'll go do it." So I flew down to Florida, and I met him, and he was an ornery old cuss, but he was willing to go. So we got him to the airport, and I got him on a plane, and we got first class tickets for him, which I'll tell you what, first time I had ever sat in first class in my life,
Oh,
and it was
nice.
really it was so far so good. And I'm sitting there halfway through the flight, everything's going fine. I'm thinking this great. I'm reading Sky Mall. I'm going to date myself on that one,
Yeah,
obviously.
sure. Why not, right?
And he stands up and says, "Help! Help! I'm being kidnapped! I'm being kidnapped!" So I did what any dude nurse would do. I had a sedative ready to go. I injected him right through his pant leg. He went to sleep. He sat down, and I said, "Hey, Grandpa just had a bad dream. He's fine. Everything's okay." And we continued on the flight. Now, this was not long after 9/11, so nobody had a sense of humor on airplanes at this point. But
Oh,
it
no.
all worked out. He got where he needed to go. I said, "You know what? This is what I want to do for the rest of my career." And the rest is history. Since that point, we've grown from my transporting this, curmudgeon grandfather to we now have doctors and nurses all over the country who fly with people on the commercial airlines. As a matter of fact, I think you did a better job of explaining what we do than I ever do myself.
Oh, I don't know. Well, I'll give you my intro to take with you, but I was impressed when I first met you, and this has now been 2 years ago. But I have to ask you, let's go back a little bit. Did you have a career or an interest in flying? Were you a pilot or any kind of a air connected person?
So as a dude nurse, in the trauma and burn and everything else, I very much wanted to be a flight nurse. That was really a
Okay.
goal of mine. The disadvantage that I had, the biggest disadvantage I think, was the fact that I lived here in Philadelphia, and I was a single dad with three kids at home. So it was one of those, I wasn't going to move. There aren't that many positions for flight nurses in the major metropolitan areas. Just because you have so many hospitals in such close proximity, there's really not the need to fly patients on helicopters remotely. If you live in Fargo, North Dakota, or in some
Yeah.
of these more remote regions, there's a lot more opportunities and programs. So, that, I mean, it's a numbers game. I mean, you can have 10,000 incredibly qualified nurses,
Right.
but if you only have 10 positions, it's going to be very, very difficult. So that wasn't going to work. But the advantage that I did have is that I lived 15 minutes from Philadelphia International Airport. So that's kind of what gave me the idea that this would work. Plus, I did love the movie Airplane. And I think it's one of the funniest movies of all time. And I think if everybody remembers that movie, there is a scene where they're transporting the young girl to the Mayo Clinic, and any number of jokes about that happen. So I said, well, this will work. We can do this, and we can fly patients on commercial airlines.
Sure. Why not? Right.
Mhm.
And what was your career before you entered nursing, or was that your first career?
I was a serial entrepreneur in my 20s, and I think, as any good serial entrepreneur will tell you, that involves a lot of failure. So
Yeah, I get it.
when my wife and I at the time decided that we were going to get married and we're going to have kids, I kind of realized that I need to have something I can fall back on just in the event that something I'm doing doesn't work out and I need to provide for my family. So I kind of went to nursing school more as an afterthought than anything else. I really didn't think that I would make a career out of nursing. There were 145 women in my class and five guys in my nursing class at Community College of Philadelphia. I'll give a shout out to them. I was very happy, but again, went through the program. Did not think that it was something that I was going to make a career out of. Came out of that, wound up getting a job in a trauma ICU here in Philadelphia, and I fell in love with the profession. I fell in love with the career, and I said, "This is what I want to do." Now, the entrepreneur in me kind of pushed me into the independent contracting aspect of nursing, where I would work at different hospitals on contract. And I kind of kid, it became a serial monogamy, whereas I was at the University of Pennsylvania for 4.5 years, 6 weeks at a time. And at the time they would come out with a new schedule. They say, "Bob, are you signing up for time?" And I said, "Well, are you throwing me out?" And they said no, and I said, well, then I'm signing up for time.
Yeah,
So
sure.
I was here at the University of Pennsylvania for 4.5 years on contract. People didn't realize that I was an independent contractor. My badge had a red stripe on it, which is what they use to designate contractors. And people would often ask me, Bob, what's the red stripe on your badge for? And I would tell them, if I kill one more patient, I'm out of here. So yeah,
Well, you got away with that for 4.5 years, right? Right.
I
That was your
did. So
story.
I
That
had
was
I
your
had the
story.
great pleasure to work in many of the ICUs and the trauma units, here in Philadelphia. I worked night shift. I loved working Friday nights, and the joy of working a night shift as a nurse. I got to spend time with my kids as they were growing. As a matter of fact, I
Um,
would go on a lot of the field trips that my kids went on. And one of the other dads who would go on these field trips was in the Philadelphia prison system. He was a prison guard. So the running joke that we had with everybody is, we're the two people you do not want to see at work.
this is true. Yeah, I was waiting for your punchline on that. Yeah, that's quite a combination.
Hmm.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's interesting. Although, I met a trauma doctor once on a whatever, and he said the great thing about that is people are almost dead. I mean, nobody sues you because nobody
Hmm.
sues you for saving their life at that point. So he thought that was a good position to be in for that reason. I don't know.
And if
That's
somebody can complain about something, they don't need to be where you are. That's when you're in the ICU, the patients are they're heavily sedated, they're medicated, they're on ventilators. You walk in the room and you see 15 pumps, and you're like, okay, it's another day at work.
right.
But
Yeah.
if the person can complain, then they don't need to be there, and they can go to someplace less
Time
acute.
to transfer them out. Yeah, absolutely. Well, I have
Exactly,
to
exactly.
confess, and I'm sitting here listening to this already, and we're just at the beginning of our time together, and I'm actually feeling a little bit of envy. I grew up wanting to be a missionary nurse in Africa, and
Hmm.
I started a candy stripers group in our local hospital in this little town in northern Indiana, and that's all I ever wanted to be. And then when something happened that it wasn't going to work out for that, I had to find another plan B, which I didn't have at the time. Then I went into real estate, and that's been my entire career where I help people in a different way and take some of the same skills, I think. But so I love
I
listening
think
to this.
Yeah, one of the recurring themes of your guests is that I think, life happens, while you're making other plans. And, you need to be able to adjust and say, okay, well, this isn't what I was planning on doing, but this is what I'm going to do now. And you make the best of it. And I think it really makes for an exciting and interesting life.
Yes, and certainly in dealing with older people and
Hmm.
with people who aren't old, but who have some illness or something that keeps them from living their life the way they prefer it to be. I think that taking on the challenge of helping them is just an incredible value that we like to bring out to people and help people and they're and people need that, whether they
And
realize it all the time or not, or whether they want it like your grandfather or not.
hmm
I can imagine flying with him in that situation right after 9/11. That probably was not a great situation, but obviously you handled it well.
yes,
So let me ask you a question.
sure.
So what are the kinds of situations that drive most people to call flying angels? Paint a picture of what's actually happening in that family's life at the time.
There's any number of scenarios that we come in a regular in a course of a day. The probably the most common scenario is the family have an elderly family member, who is either living alone or they're in an assisted facility of some type. Something has happened. Something changed. Maybe it was a death of a spouse. Maybe it was a fall with a broken hip, where the person was living independently for many many years alone, and then the family realizes, okay, mom just cannot live on her own in Florida where she's lived for the last 20 years, and we want to move her to Minneapolis or San Francisco, or somewhere in California where they have family close and they have support system and loved ones. But then the question is, how do you get them there? Families, they have their own lives to live. They have their children. They have jobs. Very few people have the option to just pick up fly across the country and fly with somebody back. And also, it can be a very, very intimidating process. There's really a lot that goes into flying somebody across the country, the logistics that people don't think of. So right now, we've had some issues with airports canceling flights. Be it for
Oh,
weather, be it for staffing shortage, be it for TSA shortage, be it for air traffic controllers. It's a very, very dynamic environment that people often want to find an expert that they can rely on. So what would happen is a family would reach out to us and say, "Hey, my mom was living alone. She broke her hip, or had something else happen, and she's now in a rehabilitation hospital, and we want to fly her across the country. We've made arrangements at a very nice nursing home here, and we just want to bring her out here." And from that point forward, we pretty much take care of everything bedside to bedside. We'll do all the logistics, and we'll coordinate with the sending facility. We have an in-house travel agency that will make all the flight arrangements. We're going to fly our folks first class domestically, business class internationally, and I can talk about some international scenarios as well. But what'll happen is we'll send one of our flight nurses out, and again, all of our team, as you mentioned, are critical care trained, registered flight nurses. The vast majority of our team have been nurses for 20 years. Most of these are kind of second career folks, if you will, where they worked in a hospital for many, many years, and they just want to do something different. So our nurse will go out, we'll meet with the client at the facility. We'll make arrangements to get them from where they are to the airport. The majority of our clients have mobility impairments. Very, very few are walking. So, we have all kinds of specialty equipment, especially wheelchairs and specialty transfer slings that we can use to move somebody. We'll put them in a wheelchair van, take them to the airport, fly them first class from where they need to go to where they're going to, and then take them in a wheelchair van to where they need to go. So it's bedside to bedside, and all this time, not only they're under the care of a critical care trained registered flight nurse that can deal with any potential complications. Again, I often say that our mission here is to prevent emergencies, not necessarily just respond to them. But also they're traveling with somebody who is really an expert in traveling. I mentioned that we have a full service in-house travel agency, that can be proactive in the event that there's going to be a weather delay. If we know there's going to be a storm coming through, we may wind up changing the flight somewhere else. Once the person's at the airport, our nurses fly for a living. I mean, they're experts in getting through airports. They're experts in dealing with TSA. Dealing with identification, those kinds of things, dealing with the airline crew, getting somebody on and off an aircraft. So you're traveling with somebody who not only has medical expertise, but also has expertise in traveling. So that's the best way to get somebody from point A to point B. We also do repatriation of foreign nationals. You have somebody who may be here in this country, and documented or not, but they find themselves in the healthcare system. But you mentioned that you wanted to be a missionary in Africa. Well, we go there a lot. We often get calls from hospitals saying, "Hey, we have somebody in our hospital. They were healthy up until a few months ago when, something happened, any number of myriad conditions happened, and, they need to get back to Botswana." Okay. And they're thinking, well, how in the world are they going to do that? Well, they call us and they say, okay, well, we've been there 3 times in the last couple of months. So, for us, it's pretty straightforward. So we have resources to get the person, again, to the airport. We're going to fly them on a commercial airline. Okay, we're probably going to fly through Johannesburg. If we're flying into South Africa, we're going to fly through Ethiopia. If we're flying into the northern part of Africa, easy peasy. Same thing with India. We actually have some terrific contacts with the Indian diaspora here in the United States. And there are many cases where somebody may have a terminal illness and, they're here working, but they want to spend their last time being close to family in India where they grew up. And these can be unfortunately some sick people when you have these terminal illnesses that come on quickly. So,
That's
we'll
all
find.
these many reasons why someone needs your services. It's
Yes.
pretty interesting. So everybody's heard that I have a mom who's 106. And I'm thinking, oh, we should take her to see my brother, only in Alabama. But and I thought, oh my gosh, the thought of getting in the airport, in the line, through TSA, right,
Hmm.
onto the airplane, on and off. Everybody's going to have to wait for mom to get on and off. And then I think, maybe I'm not quite up to that. But I'm sitting here thinking, well, maybe I'll just have to call Flying Angels.
That would be a good call to make.
It would be a good call. So tell us, how does your specific training as a certified dementia practitioner help you when you're moving someone who may be confused, anxious, resistant to change? Sounds kind of like the grandpa situation you were in.
Hmm. Well, yes, and I want to go back to the grandpa situation. Sedating somebody is never ever our first course of action. That's
No,
that's
I'm sure.
always just an absolute emergency backup. That we want to do at the end. And some of our team do incredible work with dementia patients. Personally, I will freely admit that I would much rather deal with a 300-pound quadriplegic on a plane than with somebody who has dementia. But at the same time, some
Really?
of our team just absolutely love transporting dementia patients, and they really are about 20 to 25% of the patients that we transport in a year. So,
Really?
there's all the strategies that we use, keeping them distracted, keeping them oriented to their reality. You're not imposing your reality on them. They may think they're going for a visit. They may think they're going somewhere for lunch. We're not going to
Oh,
impose our reality on them.
um,
Our nurses, will often bring activity boards. We're going to find out what is it that the person likes to do. If somebody has been a photographer or likes photo albums, well, we're going to we're going to put together a photo album while they're on that flight, to keep them occupied, keep them focused on what they're doing. I mentioned earlier, we're flying our patients in first class. This is really important when you're dealing with somebody who has dementia, only because you identified all the reasons that flying can be stressful. And the time at the airport is definitely part of that. It can be a crowded environment. Security can be stressful. The gate can be crowded. The last thing you want to do is take somebody down a jet bridge and then turn right into the aircraft and walk down a long metal tube. Claustrophobia
oh,
is going to
oh,
get to anybody. So what we're doing is we're going to be the first ones to board the aircraft. So we're just walking down a hallway, we're turning
oh,
right onto the plane, and we're sitting down. That's it.
oh.
And then we're going to keep them occupied with whatever it is, an activity board, um, music, video, whatever keeps them calm and distracted.
But then it must be challenging for them and then for you when all these people get on the plane around them, right? When
If
there's all this
if
activity of people they don't know, or does that not bother them?
if you can keep them focused on something else, they're probably not going to notice it as much. Again, the key is, with dementia folks, what we found is, you know getting them on the plane first, getting them to sit down. Once they're sitting down, and again, then providing whatever it is that you're going to use for them. Whether or not it's going to be pictures, photo albums that they can look at, music, video on a screen. Whatever you can get them to focus on is going to be the key.
But is it a problem when it's on a long flight? If you're flying them from California to Florida, that's a long time.
It's funny you mention that. For us, a long time is a 30-hour flight to India.
With all
Six,
yeah, with all your
yeah,
perspective, yeah.
long is very relative. Not generally, not necessarily. But there's a lot of details that you want to figure out in advance. Does this person, are they more focused in the morning? Are they more focused in the afternoon? Are you going to do a night flight for them so they can sleep, or do they have
Oh,
do they have sundowners where you certainly don't want to take them? on a red eye flight. And there is also, the option of medication, to keep them kind of calm and not sedated, but yet at the same time, maybe more medicated, than they would be normally. So, they are somewhat drowsy. One of the things I do kind of stress is you can't drag somebody kicking and screaming, onto an aircraft.
No,
And it's very difficult to sedate somebody enough, where they're just asleep, that, the
and still
scene
get
where
them
you
on the plane. Sure. Yeah.
exactly. So, you have to find that, happy balance of, again, medication, distraction. It's a holistic approach, to the patient. And again, we have some incredible nurses on the team that, they're the kind of people, they walk into a room and everybody loves them. I mean, they'll walk in and meet with the patient, and they're best friends, in 5 minutes. And this is also one of the reasons that our nurses are also meeting the patients, the day before travel. We never want a patient to meet, a nurse, okay, we're going to pick them up and then go to the airport. So sometimes our nurses will go meet with the patient, the day before they fly, and they're spending, a couple hours, with them, learning. We're talking to the family. What does mom like? What does mom not like? What topics does mom like? What subjects should we absolutely avoid? Does mom love stuffed animals? Well, we'll bring some stuffed animals along.
Yeah.
Uh,
So that was going to be one of my questions is logistically. So what happens? I make a call to you and I say, Bob, I've got this situation. So then what
mhm.
happens from A to B? You take down my information and
And from there, we're going to reach out to the providers. If mom's in a facility, we're going to coordinate with the doctors and nurses and physical therapists there, to make sure that we come up with a complete plan. Again, I was mentioning the ground transport. What kind of equipment do we need to bring? And again, we're going to talk to the therapists at the facilities, specifically with dementia patients. What is it that keeps them calm? But basically, it's coming up with a complete plan, and then we'll present that to the family and say, okay, this is what we're going to do. A lot of times, you talk about long flights. Well, do we want to flight with the connection, or are we better off say, let's do a couple hour ground transport, in Florida? Do you want to take somebody, say, from Tampa, to Orlando, if you can get them on a nonstop flight from Orlando to where they need to go versus doing a connection somewhere. Now, connections sometimes are unavoidable when you're dealing with certain routing, but the goal is always to go with a nonstop. But we'll present this to the family and then say, this is when we're going to, this is our plan. And the family says, okay, let's go, let's do it. And then we go into the scenario where we send our nurse out, and nurse meets with mom, and then the next day flies with her to where she needs to go, and we take her bedside to bedside.
and that's where you do. But so let me ask you a question now. You've mentioned a couple times taking equipment with you. So there must be times, maybe let me change that. Let me rephrase this to a question. So are there times when you take equipment with you that you don't need at the end destination? And then what do you do with it? Or do you only take things that like their wheelchair, which then they will use when they get there?
The majority of
That
the
makes sense.
patients we're transporting,
Understand.
we're transporting in our wheelchairs. Now, if somebody already has a wheelchair, we'll certainly bring those. Some of our spinal cord injury patients that we transport, we do a lot of traumatic brain injury and stroke patients for
Oh,
the centers of excellence around the country. Have maybe electric wheelchairs, and they want to take those, so we'll bring those along. But in the vast majority of scenarios, we have custom reclining wheelchairs that we use, to make sure that we can get somebody, to the airport comfortably. We really, if somebody's mobility impaired, we want to transfer them as few times as we possibly can. Every time you're
right.
transferring somebody, there's a risk of a fall and something going on, which again, I kind of mentioned we do wheelchair vans a lot. So this way, we can transfer somebody into our custom reclining wheelchairs, and all of our wheelchairs, lie back and recline, so somebody's not sitting bolt upright for a number of hours. You mentioned a 6 hour flight. Well, that 6 hour flight, may have 3 hours of ground time, at the beginning, where it's, let's say it's going to take an hour to get to the airport, and you're getting out to the airport. at least 2 hours before the flight. As a matter of fact, just given some of the delays we've been experiencing lately, we may want to get to the airport 2.5, maybe even 3 hours before the airport, and then the person is is sitting in a wheelchair. Now, our wheelchairs are much more comfortable than the ones you're going to find at the airport. Again, they recline. You can put the legs up. It's kind of like sitting in a recliner, if you will. But it's a matter of keeping the person comfortable, which is important for both people who have physical mobility. But if you have somebody who has dementia, keeping them comfortable is key to keeping them calm. If they're comfortable, they are less inclined to get agitated. Whereas, if their butt hurts, if their back hurts, if they're not comfortable, it's much more likely that they're going to go ahead and get agitated.
So I hear you talk about planning, and certainly that's important. But there must be times when somebody calls you and I need help now.
Hmm.
And I'm assuming you have people on call. You're on call
So,
24 hours to help with those emergency situations.
what I tell people, is when they ask what kind of time frame we can move on, they'll say, "Well, we want to go as soon as possible." And to me, as soon as possible is 24 to 48 hours. They're thinking 3 or 4 weeks is as soon as
Oh,
possible. So
yeah.
we have to adjust that. In an ideal world, we have a couple of days to put this plan together. And I always kind of stress to people, we are flying on commercial airlines. So we have limitations of what's available. Now, we do have staff available all the time. That's not a problem. And there are many cases where I will tell one of my nurses, or our coordinators tell the nurse, "Hey, it's 9 o'clock in the morning. You're flying out this afternoon at 3 o'clock. So just make sure you have your bags packed." And our
Yes.
nurses know to have all their equipment ready to go and packed up. But at the same time, we need to make sure that that there are flights available. We have Thanksgiving coming up. And I always kind of chuckle when somebody's going to call us on Monday of Thanksgiving week and say, "Hey, okay," or even maybe even Tuesday, and say, "Hey, we want to fly Thursday or Friday." The busiest travel days of the year. Well, we may not have any availability, so we got to see what the airlines have. So yes, while we have the staff, we need to make sure that there's flights available. We do a lot of repatriations of American citizens back to the U.S. Let's say you go overseas and something happens, and you want to get back to the U.S. as soon as possible. We'll have staff who can, we can say, "Okay, get on a plane. You're flying to Milan, Italy, to bring somebody back tonight," and then we're working on the logistics. So it really is a matter of what's available from the airline perspective. And even now, there have been awful lot of airline cancellations,
Yes.
due to the myriad of problems that we're facing this season.
Yes. 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 And so I can, yeah, I can see your situation and the family saying, "Yes, I want somebody right now." Or, "My flight got canceled, Bob. Now maybe I need to go with you," right? You're saying, "That's maybe not." So I have a question for you. At what point, and is there ever a point when you say to a family, "I'm not your best option. You really do need a medical
Yes,
ambulance type
and
situation."
we do that quite regularly. If
Yeah.
somebody is really medically fragile, one of the classic scenarios, if somebody needs to lie down and they need a stretcher, then they need to go by air ambulance. And, we're absolutely happy, to refer them off to some of the terrific air ambulance companies around. Unfortunately, none of the domestic carriers within the United States provide stretcher service, and they haven't for quite a number of years. So if somebody needs to lie flat, they just need an air ambulance. If they're on medications, IV medications, to keep their blood pressure up, what we call vasoactive drugs, then they're going to have to go by air ambulance. We have a so far, knock on wood, a perfect safety record. We haven't lost anybody yet.
You
And we have
haven't? No
terrific.
one? No, no, no
Yep.
one's passed away while they've been in your care?
Nope. Not. Nope. And I'm knocking on my desk here as as I say
Sure.
that. We've had some close ones. We've had hospice patients that
Um,
we transfer, to
um,
foreign countries, and they've passed, less than 24 hours,
um,
after they got home. Now, in many cases, people are motivated to get home, and once they get home, then they can let go, and die by the family.
sure.
But we have terrific relations with the airlines that I wouldn't want to jeopardize our relations with the airlines.
No,
As a matter of fact, there are many times when I'm on flights, I see people, passengers, getting on the plane, and I'm like, that I'm not sure this person should be on the plane. As a matter of fact, one of our company policies is always that when our nurses are flying either with patients, or if they're deadheading or flying to where the patient is, to always introduce themselves to the airline crew, and
yes,
make ourselves available and say, hey, I'm a flight nurse, I'm traveling with my kit here, if you have any emergencies, please feel free to reach out, and this and they're very appreciative of that, because this way, if they have somebody who's not looking good in the back, they can come up and tap our nurse on the shoulder and say, "Hey, would you come back and take a look at this?" Rather than having to make that dreaded, "Hey, is there a medical professional on the airplane?" So at least this way, our staff will go in and intervene, and that happens pretty regularly, unfortunately. So even when we have a patient, we'll tell them that, and we'll tell the patient that we're going to intervene so the flight doesn't get diverted,
of course.
and we get to their destination. So
But when you talk about laying down, I have to ask, there must be situations when would someone fly first class on an international flight so they have that ability to do that?
we fly business class or first class, but usually business class internationally. And yes, they have lie flat seating. So at the risk of oversimplification, if somebody can physiologically tolerate sitting for 15 to 20 minutes, we can transport them in a business class seat, so they can lie flat, throughout the vast majority of the journey. So, barring somebody having a spinal cord injury or something like that, the vast majority of people we can transport in business class seats. As a matter of fact, we often get requests for international stretcher service, that we're able to say, I think business class would be a much more comfortable way to go for the client than trying to strap somebody down on a stretcher in the back of an airplane, which is not particularly a comfortable way to go.
No, no, it isn't. So, but what kind of medical equipment are you allowed to take with you? Are you allowed to take oxygen? Are you allowed to take, I mean, do you have to use the airplane's masks? What kind of things do you take with you?
So we have oxygen concentrators that we use for all of our flights. The airlines, some airlines will provide tanked oxygen, and it's only the international carriers, and it's a select few of the international carriers that will provide tanked oxygen for patients. None of the domestic carriers provide oxygen on any of their routes. So we use battery operated portable oxygen concentrators. Now, these things are just absolute marvels. When I started, they were the size, of rollerboards. I mean, these were, very, very large, bulky machines with 5-pound
Sure.
batteries.
Yeah.
Nowadays, you can get a nice oxygen concentrator that's 5 to 10 pounds, and the batteries are relatively small and very efficient, and they're terrific ways to go. And we use these for patients who use nasal cannulas, the little prongs that go in your nose, for patients who have tracheostomies, the holes in their neck.
Uh,
We have special oxygen concentrators specifically for them. We have suction machines that we'll use for patients who, again, have either a lot of oral secretions, or suction, or may need to be suctioned out through a trach.
that's very interesting. And I always have to wonder if I were on the airplane, I'm a very curious person. I would want to know, what is that person's story? I'd be curious.
That's one of the
Who's
terrific things that our nurses talk about is our nurses are doing one-to-one care. So on a trip, they'll be with the patient for 12 hours, or longer. Some of our international flights are quite long, and you're sitting next to somebody and you're talking to them for 12 hours. So you come out being their best friend. As a matter of fact, I'm still in contact with some of the folks that I transported 10 years ago. That I know people love or hate Facebook, but I'll tell you what, it's great for making these connections, and you find out. We transported a young man probably 10 years ago. He was skiing in the French Alps, and he had a spinal cord injury there, and that left him paralyzed from his legs. And we wound up bringing him back to the U.S. And I've been following him. His graduation from college. He's involved in the Paralympic sports. So,
Oh,
10 years later, I'm still following what he's doing.
well, that was one of my questions. Do you have a story that's really stayed with you, maybe because of the personality or their background or the situation or what it meant to the family? Something that's really touching to you that is always your reminder of why you do and why you love what you do?
So years ago, the answer is yes. And it's the hospice patients that are always the ones that get to me. And we had a young woman, who was working here in the U.S. And she was from Tbilisi, Georgia, the old Soviet Union. And she was diagnosed with a very, very aggressive form of cancer, and she did not have very long, and she was really quite ill. And I wound up flying her myself, because it was one of those. I was not comfortable sending any of my team out to do it, and I would never ask any of my team to do something I wouldn't want to do. So we spent probably a good 18 hours flying her. We flew LA to Frankfurt, and then Frankfurt to Tbilisi, Georgia. And she was telling me her story, and how she came here to provide for her children. She was by herself. There was no. I mean, she had a small community, but no family here in the States. And we got to the airport in Tbilisi, and we went to the hospital. There must have been 80 people of her family all waiting at the hospital.
Uh-huh.
It was absolutely incredible to see. And we took her in the hospital, and several of her family members took me out, and they were quite appreciative that we were able to get her home. I was really quite exhausted, so I went to so this was 7 o'clock at night. They took me out to dinner. I went to the hotel, and I got up, next morning for my flight, and I said, well, let me just let me stop by the hospital and say goodbye. And found out that she had passed at 11 o'clock that night, 4 hours after we had got there. But the doctor was telling me that, the tears of joy that everybody felt, that, she passed, and that was tragic, but she saw her children, for the first time in a number of years. She saw her parents, for the first time in a number of years. She was surrounded by family. She was surrounded by the people that she loved, and they got to say goodbye to her. Not she died in the U.S. and nobody saw her. So that's one of them that just sticks to me. To this day, every time I think about her. And sorry, I get a little teary when I think about it. So
But she got to go home.
she went home. We got her home, and with hospice patients, that's what we're doing. We're getting people home. We're getting them to their loved ones. They're getting them to their family, and we're giving them that last chance, to pass on their terms, where they want to pass. Sorry.
Yeah, it's okay. No, that's touching. Um, and you had in a strange way, you had the opportunity to make that happen for her,
Hmm.
right? You're the one
Yes.
that was able to do that.
Yes.
Um, and to change the subject a little bit, is there a lighter message, maybe a passenger who kept everyone laughing and everyone was funny at something that kind of broke the tension that they They were kind of the life of the party in their own way, in their own condition.
It's funny. We do have we have a couple of these,
And
and
not to
they're
downplay the seriousness of this last lady. I don't want to
Mhm.
take away from
Yeah.
that.
No, but this there is so much, lightness and joy, as well as heaviness of heart in what we do, on a daily basis. And you don't know from one day to the other, are you dealing with tragedy and joy? One of our nurses, Doug, tells a story of he was asked to transport, grandpa, was from California to
Another great one.
Massachusetts, and it was one of those, it seemed like a perfectly normal story. Just he had dementia, he was in a nursing home, didn't have a whole lot of interaction with anybody, and he wound up, Doug went up picking him up, uneventful, wasn't really sure how aware this guy was of what was going on. They got to the airport and this guy just lit up. Well, it turned out that he was a pilot in World War II.
Oh my
And, all of a sudden, he's hearing, the sounds of airplanes. He's looking out and seeing
God.
airplanes. And all of a sudden, it's like a switch turned and he came alive.
Oh,
So,
sure. Oh, yeah.
Doug goes in there at the nursing home, and this guy's just sitting in the chair, sullen, not talking to anybody, and gets to the airport, and all of a sudden he's
It's life.
literally just he's loving life. It's like talking about airplanes and this, that, and talking to everybody, about the planes he flew. He wound up, gets him on the plane. The flight crew find out that this guy was a pilot. Well, the flight crew is coming out and they're talking to them, and they're like, "Well, do you want to come up?" So we actually wound up, Doug wound up getting him into the cockpit. So
Oh,
here he is. In the morning he's sitting in a nursing home, just
sure. Yeah.
not having any stimulation at all. To here he is a couple hours later, he's sitting in the cockpit of an airplane, and he's regaling stories of his flights, and it was a
He's in his
terrific time.
glory, right? Yeah,
Yeah,
he's in
he
his
he
element.
he was, and he was chatting away, telling stories, when he was flying, and all of his exploits, and the crews hanging around him, and when they landed, we're always the last ones off. So the pilot comes out, they're still chatting away about flying and this and that, and everybody's stories, and it was incredible to see. As Doug relays the story, it was just an incredible experience. To have this person just come back to life, to have them in their environment. So they kind of hung around the airport for a while and just watched airplanes take off and land,
Uh,
and really, it was a wonderful experience.
and again, Flying Angels was able to make that happen. And Bob, as we unfortunately reach towards the end of this, we have just a few more minutes, but when should families call you? Ideally, not the day before Thanksgiving, but how much time do you feel you need? What should they have ready for this kind of a journey? What do they need to know? What do they need to have planned? What should they know before they make this call to you?
I'd like to keep it simple. Ideally, if they
Wouldn't
have a
we all?
week,
Wouldn't we all?
if they have a week, that's kind of ideal. I mean, again, as I tell people, we're flying on commercial airlines. We're very transparent about our pricing. The airline fare is one of the larger items in our itemization. So if we can find flights that are less expensive, we'll go that route. And if the more time we have, just as everybody who buys a ticket on an airline knows, if you're buying it 2 weeks out, it may cost you less than if you're buying it 72 hours out. And the easier routes are the ones that sell out the fastest. So the more options you have. But if you have a week, all of our flight coordinators, the people who are going to be answering the phone when a family calls, they're all clinicians themselves. They're all flight nurses,
Oh,
so I'm not going to put the onus on the family to say, well, you need to have all this stuff ready. You can call our flight coordinator, have a conversation, and our flight coordinator, who's also a flight nurse, and say, okay, these are the things that we want to know, height and weight and medications and, mobility and sitting tolerance. But these are the things that our flight coordinators can have a conversation, with a family member and say, yes, this is something that we can do. This is how we would do it. Or, this may not be the best option for your loved one. You may want to consider, another way of getting them there. Um, but it's a conversation that our flight coordinators are very good at having, and they'll ask the questions, that need to be asked. So it's not like families have to think of everything up front, because there's a lot of variables that go into this. Every single flight is kind of custom tailored. So it's one of those trying to figure out what's the best way to get from point A to point B.
And I would suppose even there are some airlines that are better suited for you than others.
We tend to stick with the major carriers, American, Delta, United, domestically. I mean, we generally, we generally avoid the discount carriers. It just, there's a lot more options that we have.
Sure. And again, you have these relationships already built, and we
Yes.
already know that. And is there ever a time when someone calls, like if I just said, my mom wants to go and have Thanksgiving with my brother, I won't call you tomorrow, I promise. But can you arrange for someone who's not seriously ill, just a little bit, maybe older and hard to get
Absolutely.
to the airport?
As I used to say when I was working at a nurse in a hospital, not every night needs to be hard. you know,
Yeah.
we love patients that are not particularly complicated. Maybe grandma just has a touch of dementia, or maybe just, is functioning, but the family doesn't want her to have to be subjected to, again, trying to get to the airport, navigating check-in, navigating TSA. Some of these airports are incredibly large, and they just want
They're
somebody,
very,
to go with them. And we're absolutely happy to accommodate, and our staff love those cases. They're the most fun you can have, when you have somebody who's, is with it cognitively, and you're traveling with a friend. Now that friend just happens to be an expert in air travel, and that friend is also a critical care trained registered flight nurse too. So, if something goes
yeah,
wrong,
sure.
you're ready to go.
Yeah, what a great idea. I hadn't thought about that, but I think that's brilliant. One quick question in 30 seconds or less. What would you like Flying Angels to be that it isn't already? Or what would you like to do? And what about for you?
I would like for people to know that our service exists. I go to a lot of
We
conferences.
help with that. Yes, we hope with that.
That's, I'm sure you can help with that. But I've been going to conferences now for 10 years, and the thing I hear most often is, we never knew this service was available. And I am shouting from the rooftops, and I am, I'm again thrilled to be a guest on your podcast. And I just hope that the thing people can take away is this is an option. Our service is there. um, you know maybe we're the best option for your loved one, maybe we're not, but at least now that this is an option. And you can reach out to us, and we can provide guidance and say, this, we are the best option, or you may want to consider this or this.
But at least you'll offer those options. We
Exactly. But we're
and
here.
I am so glad you're with us. I have to tell you, I would love to be one of your nurses, but that's not in my cards for right now at this point in my life. But who knows? Who knows? Maybe sometime that'll happen. But we are so glad to have you here. For our audience, our listeners, and our viewers, we've been talking with Dr. Bob Bacheler of Flying Angels. And I hope that what you're taking away is this: that when life happens and someone you love needs to travel but can't do it alone, you're not stuck between do it yourself and hope for the best or spend a fortune on an air ambulance. There is an option, and it is called Flying Angels. Remember that the heart of Always Ageless, our program, is that you don't have to walk these transitions alone. We want to provide a resource. We're going to have Bob's information here on the screen for you. We'll have it in our text on our YouTube channel as well as the radio station. I'm Valerie Van De Zilver. Thank you so much, Bob, and our viewers and listening audience for being with us today. Take a deep breath, everyone. Give yourself some grace. Hug the people when you can, especially as we come up in this holiday season. Be with your family members. Reach out, call them, talk to them, and your friends. And remember that age is not a number, but love and wisdom are forever. We will see you on the next episode of Always Ageless. And thank you from my heart, Bob Bacheler.